The dying world. The warning signal came at midnight, Galactic Standard Time. It screamed across every communication channel in the sector. A single word repeated over and over: emergency, emergency, emergency. Then came the details, and the details were worse than anyone could have imagined. 7 was dying. The planet had been a mining colony for 300 years. 12 different alien species had dug into its rocks, pulled out its metals, and built their lives on its surface. Over 3 million people called it home. They had cities and schools and hospitals. They had families and dreams and futures they believed in. Now they had 72 hours to live. Deep beneath the planet's surface, something had gone wrong. The endless mining had weakened the planet's core. A chain reaction had started, and it could not be stopped. In 3 days, 7 would tear itself apart. The ground would crack open. The mountains would fall. Everything and everyone on the surface would die. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting aboard the space station called Harmony's Light. Representatives from 12 different species gathered in the Great Circular Chamber. They came from worlds across the galaxy. They had ships and technology and resources. Surely, they could do something. They spoke first. They were tall beings with skin that looked like living crystal. Light passed through their bodies and came out in rainbow colors. They were known as the galaxy's greatest mathematicians, and their high speaker had run the numbers personally. "Evacuation is impossible," the high speaker announced. His voice rang through the chamber like a bell. "We have calculated every option. Our fastest transport ships could save perhaps 40,000 colonists, perhaps 50,000 if we push our engines beyond safe limits. But there are 3.2 million souls on that planet. The mathematics do not lie. We cannot save them." The Brill delegation clicked their agreement. They were insect-like creatures with 6 arms and compound eyes that saw in every direction at once. They were engineers and builders, practical beings who understood limits. "Our ships are not designed for such conditions," their representative said. "The atmospheric disturbance alone would destroy half our fleet. We cannot ask our pilots to fly into certain death." They floated in their water-filled tank, their long tentacles waving slowly. They were an aquatic species, peaceful and wise, but they shook their bulbous heads. "We grieve for 7, the elder said. "We will remember them in our songs, but we cannot help them. The risk to our own people is too great." One by one, each species spoke. One by one, they said the same thing in different words. "Impossible, too dangerous, cannot be done. We are sorry." In the observer section, where lesser species were allowed to watch but not speak, Captain Park sat quietly. He was a human, and humans were still new to galactic politics. They had only joined the interstellar community 50 years ago. They had 1 seat on the council, and it came with no real power. Was 53 years old. His hair was more gray than black now, and deep lines marked his face. He had served in the Sol fleet for 30 years. He had seen battles and disasters and things that would give most people nightmares. But he had never seen anything like this. A room full of powerful beings deciding to let 3 million people die because saving them was inconvenient. Beside him sat Lieutenant. She was younger, in her 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been running calculations on her tablet since the meeting started. Now she leaned close to her captain. "Sir," she whispered, "if we called every human ship in the sector, if we pushed our engines to maximum, if we organized properly." "I know," said quietly. "It would still be almost impossible." "I know. People would die trying." "I know." Was silent for a moment, then she said, "When do we leave?" Almost smiled. This was why he had chosen her as his second-in-command. She understood. She always understood. The high speaker was finishing his speech. His crystal body flickered with sad blue light. "We must accept reality," he said. 7 cannot be saved. We will mourn the loss. We will remember the dead. But we cannot change what mathematics has proven to be true. This session is. Wait. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the chamber like a knife. Every alien head turned toward the observer section, toward the human who had dared to speak. Captain Park stood up slowly. He was not a tall man by human standards, and he was tiny compared to most of the aliens in the room, but something in the way he stood made him seem larger. Something in his eyes made the high speaker stop mid-sentence. "We'll handle it," said. The chamber fell completely silent. The tilted his crystalline head to one side. Light scattered through his confusion in patterns of yellow and orange. "Captain Park," the high speaker said carefully, "you have one vessel, one human cruiser with a crew of perhaps 800. You cannot possibly evacuate 3 million colonists. Did you not hear the calculations? Did you not understand?" Walked forward, past the rows of alien observers, until he stood in the center of the chamber. Every eye in the room followed him. "I heard," he said. "I understood, and I'm telling you we'll handle it." "But the mathematics." "I don't care about the mathematics." A gasp rippled through the chamber. The look genuinely shocked. To them, mathematics was sacred. Mathematics was truth. To ignore mathematics was like ignoring gravity. "Captain," the Brill representative clicked nervously, "surely you realize that wanting something does not make it possible. Your species is young. Perhaps you do not understand how the universe works." Turned to look at the alien. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe we understand something you've forgotten." He looked around the chamber at all the powerful beings who had decided to let millions die. He saw their advanced technology, their ancient wisdom, their careful calculations. And he saw their fear of trying something difficult, fear of failing, fear of sacrifice. "Lieutenant," he called out, "send the word to Earth Command, Operation Impossible, authorization, Park." Captain Saul Fleet was already moving, her fingers flying across her communication device. The high speaker raised one crystalline arm. "Captain Park, I must advise against this course of action. Your species will waste resources. Your people will die for nothing. You cannot fight mathematics." Turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, he stopped and looked back at the council. "Watch us," he said. Then he was gone. The aliens looked at each other in confusion. They did not understand what they had just witnessed. They thought they were watching a foolish young species walk toward pointless death. They were wrong. They were watching humanity wake up. The call goes out. The message traveled faster than light itself. It jumped from relay station to relay station, crossing the vast emptiness between stars in seconds. It reached Earth first, then spread outward to every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost in the galaxy. The message was simple. The message was clear. 7 is dying. 3 million souls need rescue. All ships respond. Commander Shin received the message in Sol Command, the military headquarters orbiting Earth. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight knot. Her face showed 60 years of life and 30 years of military service. She had survived 3 wars and countless smaller conflicts. Nothing surprised her anymore. But this message made her pause. She read it twice. Then she called up the data on 7. She saw the numbers, the timeline, the population, the distance. She understood immediately what Captain Park was asking for. He was asking for a miracle. Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a soldier who knows the battle ahead will be hard, perhaps impossible, but who has decided to fight anyway. She activated Emergency Protocol Omega. It had never been used before. It gave her authority to commandeer every human vessel in the sector, military or civilian, for rescue operations. It also sent out a request, not an order, a request, to every human ship beyond her authority. "Help us," the request said. "Help us save them." The response began within minutes. On a trade route near the nebula, Captain received the message aboard his cruise liner, the Starlight Dream. The ship was carrying 4,000 tourists on a luxury tour of the Outer Rim. They had paid enormous sums for this vacation. They expected fine food, beautiful views, and comfortable beds. Was a retired naval officer. He had spent 20 years in Saul Fleet before taking this civilian job. He had thought his fighting days were over. He had thought he would spend his remaining years showing rich people the wonders of space. He was wrong. Called his crew together and explained the situation. Then he addressed the passengers over the ship's communication system. "Ladies and," he said, "we have received a distress call. 3 million people are going to die unless we help them. I am changing our course to 7. I am converting our luxury cabins into refugee housing. I am asking every passenger who is physically able to help with rescue operations. This is not an order. This is a request, but I believe you will do the right thing." He paused, then added, "Also, I am refunding your tickets. We should arrive at 7 in 14 hours. Please prepare yourselves." Within an hour, the entertainment modules were being removed to make space. Passengers who had been sunbathing on the observation deck were now learning basic first aid. The Starlight Dream changed course and pushed its engines to maximum speed. Across the sector, similar scenes played out. Mining ships abandoned their claims. Months of work, fortunes in ore left floating in space. The miners did not hesitate. They turned their ships towards 7 and flew. Cargo haulers dumped their freight. Contracts worth millions were broken without a second thought. The haulers needed empty space for refugees, and they would have empty space. Private yachts owned by wealthy families changed course. Security vessels escorting corporate executives changed course. Research ships studying distant phenomena changed course. Everyone who heard the message and had a ship capable of carrying passengers turned toward the dying world. On Mars, Doctor was studying rock samples in her laboratory when the alert reached her. She was a geologist, one of the best in human space. She had spent 30 years studying how planets worked, how their cores functioned, how their crusts moved, how their internal pressures balanced. She read the data on 7 and immediately understood something the aliens had missed. The chain reaction destroying the planet might be slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. If someone knew exactly where to place the charges and exactly how much explosive to use, they might buy the rescue fleet more time. Was not a soldier. She was not brave by nature. She was a quiet scientist who preferred rocks to people. But she looked at that data and knew that she might be the only person who could make those calculations correctly. She commandeered a research shuttle without permission. Her supervisor yelled at her over the communication system. She ignored him. 10 minutes later, she was in space, flying towards 7 at maximum speed. Back on the Dauntless, Captain received reports from across human space. Ships were coming. Hundreds of ships. More ships than he had dared to hope for. Lieutenant compiled the numbers. At current count, we have 437 vessels responding. Combined capacity for approximately 2.3 million passengers. She paused. It's still not enough. More will come, said. How do you know? Watched another blip appear on the sensor display. Another ship changing course coming to help. Because that's who we are, he said. When things are worst, we're at our best. When everyone says impossible, we say let's try anyway. The Galactic Council was monitoring human communication channels. They had expected chaos, panic, perhaps a few ships making a token effort before giving up. What they saw confused them. The high speaker watched the sensor data with growing disbelief. Human ships were converging from every direction. Civilian ships, military ships, ships that looked like they might fall apart in atmosphere, all heading towards certain death. What are they doing? He asked his aide. The aide had no answer. They know the odds, the high speaker continued. They know the mathematics. They know many of them will not survive. Why are they going? The aide studied the human transmissions. He found one message, sent from a small cargo ship called the Morning Star. The captain was a young woman named Jinnah. Her ship was old, barely held together, and could perhaps carry 50 refugees at most. Her message was short. "Because someone has to," she had written. "Because if we don't, who will?" The aide showed this message to the High Speaker. The read it several times, his crystalline body flickering with colors that had no human names, confusion, wonder, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "They are not logical," the High Speaker said finally. "No," the aide agreed, "they are not. They will fail." "Perhaps." The High Speaker watched another dozen human ships appear on the sensors. He thought about mathematics and certainty, and the careful calculations that governed his species' every decision. Then he thought about that young captain in her broken ship, flying toward almost certain death, because someone had to. "Perhaps," the High Speaker said slowly, "there are things our mathematics does not measure." His aide did not respond. He was watching the human fleet grow larger by the minute, and for the first time in his long life, he wondered if the impossible might happen after all. The first miracle. The ground never stopped shaking. Captain Park felt it through the soles of his boots as he stepped off the Dauntless and onto the surface of 7. The tremors came every few seconds, sometimes strong enough to make him stumble, sometimes just a gentle reminder that the planet beneath his feet was dying. The sky was wrong. It should have been blue. The colony record said 7 had beautiful blue skies, but now it was gray and orange, filled with ash and smoke from 100 volcanic eruptions. The air smelled like burning metal and sulfur. Even through his breathing mask could taste the death of a world. The capital city spread out before him, or what remained of it. Buildings had collapsed, roads had cracked open, fires burned in the distance, and no one was fighting them anymore. There were more important things to do. Established his command center in the city's stadium, a massive oval structure that had somehow survived the worst of the quakes. His crew spread out across the city immediately. They had trained for disaster relief. They knew what to do. Sergeant O took charge of logistics. She was a heavy-set woman with a calm voice and a mind like a computer. Within 2 hours, she had divided the entire planet into sectors. Each incoming human ship was assigned a sector and a quota, a number of refugees they needed to evacuate. No confusion, no overlap, maximum efficiency. Lieutenant coordinated communications. She tracked every ship, every landing zone, every shuttle flight. Her voice never wavered, even when she was reporting deaths, even when she was telling crews their ships had been damaged beyond repair. She stayed calm because the mission needed her to stay calm. The aliens who lived on 7 watched the humans work with something like amazement. They were and Brill and half a dozen other species. They had received the Galactic Council's announcement that evacuation was impossible. They had accepted their deaths. Many had said goodbye to loved ones on other worlds. Some had simply sat down and waited for the end. Now these strange creatures were running through their broken streets, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings, setting up medical stations in parking lots. The humans were dirty and tired and clearly afraid, but they did not stop. They never stopped. An elder approached as he directed traffic at the stadium entrance. The elder's crystalline skin had cracked in several places, injuries from a building collapse. He moved slowly, painfully. "Why?" the elder asked. His voice was weak, confused. "Your council said impossible. Why do you come?" Helped the elder to a medical station before answering. "Because you need help," he said simply. "Because we could come, because nobody else would." The elder did not seem to understand. He let the human medics treat his wounds and said nothing more. Doctor arrived 6 hours after. Her research shuttle barely survived the landing. 3 of its stabilizers had burned out during descent. She did not care about the ship. She cared about the data. She found immediately and explained her theory. The chain reaction destroying 7 was being amplified by a massive vein of crystallized solarium deep beneath the planet's surface. Solarium was a rare mineral that made energy reactions stronger. If they could destroy that vein with a precisely calculated explosion, they might interrupt the amplification. The planet would still die, but it might die more slowly. How much more slowly? Asked. Maybe 40 hours, said. Maybe 50, I cannot be certain. 40 hours, 50 hours. It could mean the difference between saving 2 million people and saving all of them. What do you need? His face was grim. Someone has to carry the explosives down there manually. The mining shafts are too unstable for drones. The radiation at that depth. She paused. Anyone who goes down there will not come back up. Closed his eyes for a moment. He had known somehow that it would come to this. Every miracle had a price. He called for volunteers. He explained the mission clearly. He explained what it meant. Then he waited. 3 hands rose immediately. Private Menu was 23 years old. He had joined Sol Fleet because he wanted to see the galaxy. He had been on the Dauntless for only 8 months. He was young and scared and brave in the way that only young people can be brave, without fully understanding what he was sacrificing. Corporal was 31. She had a daughter back on Earth, a little girl who had just started school, had a picture of her daughter in her pocket. She touched it once before stepping forward. Specialist Nam was the oldest at 45. He had no family, no close friends. He had spent his life alone, and he had always wondered if his life mattered. Now he knew it would. Met with all 3 of them privately. He told them what their sacrifice would mean. He told them they could change their minds and no one would think less of them. All 3 refused. Minu smiled at his captain. It was a nervous smile, but it was real. "Tell my mother I was brave," he said. Put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Tell her yourself, that's an order." They both knew it was a lie, but it was a kind lie, and sometimes kind lies are all we have. The 3 volunteers suited up. They loaded the explosives onto a cargo sled. They said goodbye to their quick hugs, brief words, promises to be remembered. Then they descended into the planet's dying heart. Watched the monitors as they went deeper and deeper. He watched their vital signs fluctuate as the radiation increased. He watched them struggle through collapsed tunnels and climb over broken machinery. He watched them keep going when their bodies screamed at them to stop. 2 hours into the descent's radiation alarm started screaming. She turned it off. An hour after that, fell and broke his leg. Minu and carried him between them, never slowing down. They reached the solarium vein 4 hours after they started. It glowed in their helmet cameras, beautiful and deadly, a ribbon of crystallized light running through the dark rock. Minu set the charges while the others watched for cave-ins. His hands were shaking from the radiation damage, but he did not make a single mistake. Doctor guided him through the communication link, her voice calm and steady even though tears were running down her face. "Charges set," Minu reported. His voice was weak now. They were all dying, their bodies breaking down cell by cell, their organs failing, their lives measured in minutes rather than hours. "Detonation in 60 seconds, said. "Get as far back as you can." They couldn't go far. They could barely walk. They found a small alcove in the tunnel wall and pressed themselves against the rock. "Captain," said over the communication link. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell my daughter. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't come home." "I will," promised. His own voice was not steady. Captain added, "It mattered. Tell everyone my life mattered." "It did," said. "It always did." Minu said nothing. He just hummed a song his mother used to sing to him when he was small, a lullaby about stars and dreams and endless skis. The countdown reached 0. The explosion was perfect. Doctor had calculated correctly. The solarium vein shattered and the chain reaction slowed. The planet's death was delayed by 41 hours. The 3 volunteers died instantly. They never felt the explosion. They never knew pain. They just saved millions of lives and became heroes. Stood alone in the command center after the communication link went dead. He stood there for a long moment, remembering 3 people he had just sent to their deaths. Then he straightened his shoulders and went back to work. There were still millions of people to save. The first miracle was complete, but the mission was far from over. The second miracle. The news of the first miracle spread faster than anyone expected. Doctor's explosion had worked. The planet was still dying, but now it was dying slowly. 41 extra hours had been bought with 3 human lives. Across 7, rescue operations that had seemed hopeless suddenly had a chance. Across the human fleet, tired crews found new energy. And across the galaxy, beings who had accepted the inevitable began to wonder if the impossible might actually happen. Captain did not have time to celebrate. He did not have time to mourn the 3 who had died. He had millions of people to move, and every second counted. The operation ran like a massive machine. Ships landed, loaded, refugees took off. More ships landed, more refugees loaded, more takeoffs. The rhythm never stopped. In the stadium command center, Sergeant O tracked every movement on her screens, calling out instructions, solving problems, keeping the chaos organized. Sector 7 is clear, she reported. Moving teams to Sector 8. We have a structural collapse in Sector 12, redirecting 3 shuttles to assist. Lieutenant handled the communications. Her voice had grown hoarse from constant talking, but she never complained. Mining ship Brave Fortune, you are cleared for landing Zone Delta. Cargo hauler Silver Wind, hold position. We have atmospheric interference in your sector. Medical ship Healing Hand, we need you in the Eastern District immediately. The humans worked in shifts, 12 hours on, 4 hours off, but most of them ignored the schedule. They ate while walking. They slept in corners for 20 minutes at a time. They pushed their bodies past every reasonable limit because the mission demanded it. And then the second wave arrived. Was reviewing evacuation numbers when his voice cut through the noise. Captain, you need to see this. He looked at her sensor display and felt his heart stop. Ships were appearing at the edge of the system. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Human ships from colonies that should not have received the message in time. Vessels that had pushed their engines past all safety limits, burning out their cores to arrive faster. Civilian craft held together with emergency repairs and desperate hope. Hal breathed. They use something called the relay boost, explained. It's a theoretical technique, dangerous, never tested on this scale. You basically overload your communication array to amplify the distress signal. Our message jumped further and faster than it should have. Who started it? Pulled up the records. A young pilot on the patrol ship Northern Star. She had the idea. She spread the word. The message reached colonies 3 days away. 3 days away. Ships that were 3 days away had pushed their engines to reach 7 in less than 2 days. That meant running reactors at dangerous levels. That meant risking explosive failure with every passing hour. That meant crews who knew they might die before ever reaching the planet. They came anyway. Captain Ryu landed her cargo hauler Mountain's Courage with smoke pouring from 3 of her 4 engines. The ship barely made it through the atmosphere. It would never fly again. The damage was too severe. Did not care. She stepped onto the ash-covered ground, coughed twice, and looked around until she found someone who looked like they were in charge. She walked up to with a determined expression on her smoke-stained face. "We can fit 800, she said. "Where do you need us?" Behind her, more ships dropped from the sky. Broken ships, damaged ships, ships that had no business flying in these conditions. But they flew anyway because the mission demanded it. The High Speaker had traveled to 7 to observe. He had expected to witness a noble but futile effort, brave humans dying in a meaningless gesture. Instead, he was witnessing something he could not explain. He stood beside Captain in the stadium command center, watching the organized chaos. Human crews were everywhere, dirty and exhausted but still moving, still working, still refusing to give up. "Your ships are damaged," the High Speaker said. "Many will not survive the return journey." "We know," replied. "Your people are dying of radiation exposure. The planetary atmosphere is toxic. Every hour you stay reduces your chances of survival." "We know. You are expending resources you cannot replace. Fuel, medical supplies, ship components. Your economy will suffer for years." "We know." The High Speaker's crystalline body flickered with frustration. "Then why do you do this? The mathematics of sacrifice." Turned to face the alien. He was tired. His eyes were red, his uniform was stained with ash and sweat, and he had not slept in 30 hours, but his voice was steady. "Let me ask you something," said. "If it was your people down here, if it was colonists facing extinction, what would you do?" The High Speaker considered the question carefully. "We would calculate the optimal response. We would save those we could save and accept the loss of those we could not. We would act logically." "And how many would you try to save?" "Perhaps 50,000, as I said in the council chamber. That is the maximum our mathematics supports." Nodded slowly. "And the other 3 million, the children, the families, the people who were just living their lives, you would let them die because saving them was inefficient." "It is not a matter of efficiency. It is a matter of possibility. We calculated." "You calculated wrong." The words hung in the air between them. The High Speaker's light patterns shifted to angry red, then slowly cooled to confused purple. "Explain," he said. Pointed at the sensor display at the hundreds of human ships now filling Seven's orbit. "Your mathematics told you this was impossible. Your calculations said these ships couldn't come, had no logical reason to come. But they came anyway. Not because the numbers made sense. Not because it was safe or smart or efficient. They came because someone needed help." He paused, watching a shuttle land in the distance, watching human crews rush forward to help refugees aboard. "That's what your mathematics doesn't measure," continued. "Heart, stubbornness. The simple, stupid, beautiful human belief that if something needs to be done, you find a way to do it, even when it's impossible, especially when it's impossible." The High Speaker was silent for a long moment. His crystalline body cycled through colors that had no human names, ancient colors, thoughtful colors, the colors of a being whose understanding of the universe was slowly changing. "You will not save everyone," he finally said. It was not a challenge, it was almost a question. "Maybe not," admitted, "but we'll save more than you thought we could, and the ones we lose, we'll lose them trying, we'll lose them fighting, we'll lose them doing everything we possibly could." "And that matters to you, the effort even if it fails." "The effort always matters, the trying always matters, because if we stop trying when things get hard, if we give up when the mathematics say impossible, then we stop being human." The High Speaker turned back to watch the rescue operations. Humans were carrying injured aliens to medical stations. Humans were loading frightened children onto shuttles. Humans were dying of radiation exposure and exhaustion, and other humans were stepping up to take their places. "We calculated the impossible," the High Speaker said quietly. Almost smiled. "Yeah, you did. Perhaps," this voice was strange now, uncertain, "perhaps there are things our mathematics cannot calculate." "Maybe," said, "or maybe you just need better math." He turned away to deal with another crisis, leaving the alien alone with his thoughts and the growing evidence that impossible was just a word that humans had decided to ignore. The impossible happened. The final hours were the worst. Seven's death came faster now, despite Doctor's miracle. The ground cracked open in new places every minute. Volcanoes erupted without warning. The atmosphere itself seemed to be tearing apart, filled with fire and ash and the screaming wind of a planet in its final agony. But the humans did not leave. Ships that had loaded their maximum capacity went back for more. Pilots who had been flying for 20 hours straight refused to rest. Crews that had lost half their members to radiation sickness kept working with whoever remained. Was one of those pilots. She was 24 years old, barely out of flight school, assigned to a small shuttle called the Little Star. She had never faced anything more dangerous than a training simulation. Now she was flying through an apocalypse. Her shuttle had already made 7 runs, carrying refugees from the collapsing eastern districts to the safety of orbit. 7 runs through volcanic ash, through atmospheric storms, through air so hot it melted sensor equipment. Her shuttle was falling apart around her. Warning lights covered her control panel like angry red stars. Then the call came. Shuttle Little Star, we have 19 civilians trapped in Sector 19. Building collapse. They cannot move. All other craft are assigned. Can you respond? Looked at her control panel. Her engines were running at 40% efficiency. Her hull had 3 microfractures. Her atmospheric filters were clogged with ash. Any reasonable pilot would say no. Any sane person would explain that the shuttle could not handle another descent. Changed course toward Sector 19. Little Star responding, she said into her communication link, on my way. The descent nearly killed her. Twice. A volcanic eruption threw debris at her shuttle, cracking her viewport. An atmospheric shockwave sent her spinning toward a mountain before she regained control. By the time she reached the collapsed building, her shuttle was barely functional. But she landed. The 19 civilians were Brill, aliens who had never expected rescue. They had huddled together in the ruins, clicking their prayers, waiting for death. When appeared in the doorway of her broken shuttle, they did not believe she was real. Come on, shouted over the screaming wind. We have to go now. She loaded them one by one. The youngest was a child, no bigger than her arm. The oldest was an elder who could barely walk, carried some of them herself, ignoring the pain in her exhausted body. On takeoff, her hull breached. The cockpit began venting atmosphere. Temperature dropped instantly, had seconds to make a decision. She sealed herself in the cargo bay with the refugees. Then she flew the shuttle manually through a crack in her helmet's visor, navigating by instinct and prayer. Her hands went numb from the cold, her vision blurred from oxygen deprivation, but she kept flying. She lost 2 fingers to frostbite. She lost hearing in one ear when a pressure change ruptured her eardrum. But when her shuttle finally reached the rescue fleet in orbit, all 19 refugees were alive. Passed out at the controls. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a Brill child touching her frozen hand, clicking something that might have been thank you. In the final hour, the Dauntless itself made one last descent. Captain had refused to leave the surface while any civilians remained. Now there was one group left, 300 refugees gathered at the edge of a crumbling city, cut off by lava flows, unreachable by smaller craft. Brought his cruiser down into the atmosphere. It was madness. A ship that size was never meant for atmospheric landing, especially not in these conditions, but had run out of options, and running out of options had never stopped him before. The Dauntless shook violently as it descended. Hull plates groaned under the stress. Lieutenant called out damage reports in a steady voice, never showing fear. Hull temperature critical. Stabilizers at 70%. 60%. Sir, we have stress fractures forming on the port side. Keep us steady, ordered, just a little longer. They landed on a flat stretch of rock that was already beginning to crack. Personally manned the loading bay doors, pulling survivors aboard with his own hands. He was 53 years old, exhausted beyond measure, but he lifted children and helped elders and shouted encouragement to the refugees streaming up the ramp. Move, everyone move. We don't have much time. The ground beneath the ship began to shake. Captain's voice came over the intercom. Seismic activity increasing. We have maybe 2 minutes before this entire area collapses. How many more outside? 37. Grabbed a young who had stumbled and pushed her toward the ship's interior. Run, keep running. The last refugee came aboard with 17 seconds to spare, slammed the loading bay doors, and shouted for immediate liftoff. The Dauntless rose from the surface as the ground fell away beneath them. Through the rear cameras, watched the city disappear into a river of fire. Seconds later, the entire region collapsed into the planet's molten core. 7 died behind them, but 3.2 million colonists lived. Every single one. The Galactic Council received the final report 3 days later. The numbers seemed impossible, but they were by 17 independent sources. Population of 7, 3,247,892 souls. Number evacuated, 3,247,892 souls. Number lost, 0. The human cost was different. 37 ships destroyed, 192 humans dead, some from radiation exposure, some from accidents, some who simply pushed their bodies past the point of survival. They had given everything they had, and some had given more. The High Speaker addressed the Council in a session that would be remembered for centuries. "We calculated the impossible," he said. His crystalline body glowed with colors that other species had never seen before, colors that his own kind had never seen before, colors that meant wonder. "We were wrong. Not about the mathematics. The mathematics were correct. We were wrong about what impossible means." He paused, letting the silence fill the chamber. "The humans taught us something today. Impossible is not a wall. It is a door. And humans do not see doors. They see things that have not yet been opened." The Council voted unanimously to establish a new Memorial Day, Remembrance of 7. It would honor the humans who died and the lesson they taught the galaxy. On Earth, Captain Park attended the memorial service for the fallen. He wore his dress uniform, cleaned and pressed, medals shining on his chest. He stood straight and tall as he read the names of the dead. Private Menu, Corporal Specialist Nam. He read all 192 names. He did not rush. Each name deserved to be heard clearly, to hang in the air for a moment before the next. He did not cry. He would cry later, alone in his quarters, where no one could see. For now, he stood strong because the galaxy was watching, and the galaxy needed to understand something about humanity. After the service, a young officer approached him. She was newly promoted, fresh from training, looking at like he was something more than human. "Sir," she said, "how did you know? How did you know we could do it when everyone said it was impossible?" Thought about the question for a long time. "I didn't know," he finally admitted. "I just knew we had to try, and I knew that if we tried, really tried with everything we had, then something would happen. Maybe not the thing we expected, maybe not the thing we planned, but something." He looked up at the sky, at the stars that held a galaxy full of beings who had learned something new about the universe. "When humans say we'll handle it," he said, "we mean it. We don't calculate odds. We don't measure possibilities. We just do what needs to be done and figure out the rest along the way." He smiled slightly. "That's not logical, it's not efficient, but it's who we are." The young officer nodded slowly, understanding forming in her eyes. "And when the impossible is the only option?" she asked. Smile grew wider. "Then we make it possible, whatever it takes, however long it takes, we make it possible." He walked away, leaving the young officer with a new understanding of what it meant to be human, and why, when humanity said they would handle something, the wise response was to step aside and watch the impossible happen. Because for humans, impossible was just another word for not yet. and not yet always became done.